Hello guys, we are on the seventh game on the concept of bishop pair, and the game is played between Karpov and Spassky in Hamburg 1982. The game goes like e4, d6, d4, knight f6 and knight c3, g6. This was the first time Spassky played the Pirc defense against Karpov. Karpov answered with the classical system, his favorite. There are few surprises in the classical system. Knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, castle shot, and bishop g4. And this is a logical move with two ideas behind it. One is to put pressure on the d4 pawn with knight c6 and e5 with a possible exchange on f3. The second is to exchange the bishop for the f3 knight and to set the pawns in a Caro-Kann formation, that is c6, d5, e6. And now bishop e3, knight c6, and Spassky chooses the first plan. Now queen d2, and here instead of queen d2, d5, bishop takes f3, and knight e5 and bishop e2, c5 seems to offer more to white, but black's position is actually without weaknesses, and white cannot easily organize the advance of his e-pawn. So white played queen d2, now rook e8, rook fe1, a6, controlling the b5 square. Now rook ad1. White has refrained from attacking the black bishop on g4, intending to save time. Perhaps black will capture the knight even unprovoked. Indeed, black could not find any other useful moves, and so decide to capture the knight, a small victory for white. Bishop takes f3, and e5. Now d takes e5, opening the position for the bishop pair. d5 here is wrong. Black answers with knight d4 and gets comfortable play. So after d takes e5 and knight takes e5 gives advantage to white. Knight a4, and this is a very interesting move. The knight goes to the rim and with two ideas in mind, and one is to transfer it to the c5 or c4 or even d3 via b2. The second idea is to play c3, restricting the c6 knight, a very important strategical resource in positions with this pawn structure. Queen e7, c3, b6, taking away the c5 square but weakening the a6 pawn. White reacts logically. Queen e2, removing the queen from the d file and targeting the pawn on a6. Knight d8, a very solid move. Black removes the knight from a bad position on c6 and is ready to use two routes to reactivate it, from d8 to b7 and d6, or from d8 to e6 and f4. b3, knight e6, g3. Of course, white places his pawns mostly on dark squares, making his light squared bishop the dominant piece and restricting the opponent's knight. h5, once again a good move. Black intends to play knight g4 at the right time. Also, there is a reasonable plan to exchange dark squared bishop after the moves king h7 and bishop h6. Knight b2, b5. The pawn move eliminates the threat to a6 pawn and takes away the c4 square from the knight. However, the c5 is weakened now. Here instead knight c5 was better. If then b4, then knight b7. Here king h7 is not good. After knight d3, knight f8 and knight b4, white is better here. So black plays c5, knight d3, knight d8, bishop g2. The bishop attends a new and important diagonal. c6, and now f3, knight b7, bishop h3. Now both bishops are on their ideal squares. White also intends knight b4, a5, a4, fixing the pawns on a5 and posing problems to the b5 pawn. ba4, this helps white, who will dominate on the weakened c4 and c5 squares, but what else to do? B takes a4, knight h7, queen f2, securing control over the c5 square and supporting the bishop domination. Rook e d8, bishop b6. It is useful to note the difference in the minor pieces activity. Rook d6. Black wants to control the d file, but this rook will soon face problems. And now knight c5 is not precise. Here instead f4 gives a strong initiative to white. The point is that black rook on d6 is in trouble. White simply threatens to capture twice on e5 and dominate with the two bishops. Black cannot capture on f4 because the e4 pawn will be advanced with deadly effect. So f4 could have been played instead of knight c5. So after knight g5, bishop g2, bishop f8. This is the key mistake. Black overlooked white's strong next move. And here rook takes d1, rook takes d1, knight takes c5, then queen takes c5, queen takes c5, bishop takes c5 was a much better option, but black evidently did not want to give up the d file. Bishop f8, then rook b1. After this the game is almost over. Black cannot prevent the f4. Knight d8, f4, rook f6. Black wants to complicate things. Karpov's realization was superb. The rook on f6 is trapped. Knight d3, e takes f4, g takes f4, knight g e6, e5. Here the computer shows it as a blunder. Let's go back and see. After rook f6, after rook f6, then knight d3, then e takes f4, then g takes f4, knight g e6, e5, and now the computer says Rook takes f4. Now queen e3. He takes f, knight d3. Here, I'm sorry guys, I played a wrong move. Here it was knight d3, not knight b3. And after knight d3, e takes f4 and g takes f4 and knight g e6 and then now e5 and rook f5, then bishop e4 and the game is over here. Then after knight g7, then bishop c5, exchanging pieces and opening the file for the b1 rook. Now queen e6, then bishop takes f8, then after king takes f8, then knight c5, then queen e7, then rook ed1, then rook takes f4, now knight d7 check, and now queen takes d7, then now again queen takes d7, I'm sorry, rook takes d7, then rook takes f2, then after king takes f2, knight g e6 and rook d6, rook c8, now rook b6. Now the pawns on the queen side are lost, and after c5 there is rook b5, and after king e7 there is rook takes a5, then after rook c7 rook d a6, and rook d a6, and now f5, ef6, king f6, now rook a7, rook c8, rook a8, then rook c7, then rook 5 a7, rook takes a7, rook takes a7, now g5, bishop d5, king e5, bishop takes e6, then knight takes e6, now a5, king d5, rook e7, knight f4 and a6 now, and black resigned here. Okay guys, I hope you would have enjoyed the game. I'll meet you in the next game. Thank you all.